Welcome to the FDC Group podcast. My name is Michelle Crowley and I'm delighted to be joined by Michael McCormack. Michael, how are you today?
Not too bad, Michelle. And you?
Very good, thank you. Very good. Great to have you here. Michael, can we just talk about your professional career to date?
Okay, I suppose I'm an old hand in FDC at this stage. The years seem to creep up as we go along. I'm 27 years with FDC. I would have started in 1996. I live in Mallow, which is very central for a lot of the FDC offices. I'm married to Niamh, I have 3 daughters, and as I said, the years are creeping up. They're getting older and I'm staying in FDC longer, so yeah, that's the background.
Very good. You've seen a lot of changes then in the 27 years?
I certainly have. Actually, we just had a call this morning with one of our trainees, and at risk of kind of going back into old times, I'm always saying, like, this is the way it used to be when we started, and I wonder, are they getting sick of hearing that at times? But there's definitely been a lot of changes, the move from paper to online being one. And I suppose one of the biggest ones is the kind of concentration of the industry partners we're dealing with now, as opposed to when we started off back in the mid-90s. There was a lot more kind of interaction with different companies, whereas now it's a lot more concentrated, as I say.
Yeah. And if we go back to your qualifications, what did you study?
Actually, I diverted, I think, off my original path. I started off in recreational management in Waterford and did a diploma in that, and subsequently worked in AIB and completed a degree in business studies up in UCC then by night, and that was just prior to joining FDC. So a slight divergence, but for the good, you know, it proved to be. Yeah.
Good scope. And you've seen a lot of different economic conditions over the years.
We have, and definitely I think probably the biggest one we saw in FDC would have been the crash of 07, 08. And that was probably the toughest time we saw in FDC, but it also showed us the strength and endurance of the FDC brand, the loyalty of clients, and the loyalty of FDC to its own staff also, because, I mean, we say it since, like, you know, we didn't lose staff and we didn't lose clients during that period, which was testament to the overall brand, I suppose, and the management of FDC from the top down.
Excellent, yeah, so you help people trade out of it, which is
exactly.
Is back to the trust
and look,
foundation.
It was, I mean, there was tough weeks there where there was rumours going around about, you know, cash was going to be here and something else. Anglo-Irish Bank was going wallop and all this was happening, and people were ringing up saying, where's my money going to go? And like, it was a time where you probably questioned what you were doing. It was the industry not to be in for once at that time. But look, we got through it, and as I say, it was testament to the overall strength of the FDC body. And
no doubt contributed to its growth, the way it's gone.
Oh, certainly. I mean, if we retained clients in that era and subsequent growth that came from that, I think that was the foundation for a lot of the newer clients we got as well, because a lot of it is family interaction, especially in financial services, where, you know, word of mouth is very, very strong. And I think that, you know, as I say, if you're going down a hole with business or with, we'll say, markets dropping, if you're holding people's hand going down the hole, that's appreciated. Communication is king. And, you know, it stood to us in the years that came afterwards.
Brilliant. And you're sales director of the financial services, Michael, in FDC Group. Could you just talk us through the functions and responsibilities of that role?
I can. I suppose the grounding for the role in sales director came from my own interaction with clients over 20 years, face to face, doing the kind of bread and butter business. And that's where I would have learnt, you know, my own skills that I apply to the sales director role presently. I suppose in summary, a lot of it is down to managing our advisory team. And a lot of that is managing the kind of commercial targets, but also managing the way they achieve those commercial targets. And we would like to see it done with what we would call the FDC way, and following our own culture. So that's a big part of it, managing that team. I also liaise then with the aforementioned kind of industry partners. We have their representatives on the ground to make sure that, you know, what we're putting in front of our clients is correct and up to date, etc., and compliant. I also, I suppose, liaise with our managing director on strategy, like where we see ourselves, not just next week or next year, but in 5 years' time. And I think that's a big part of our success as well, in that we were able to preempt things that were changing into the future. Correct lines of communication as well. I'd have a role to play there, making sure that, as I call it, like the up, down and sideways, that we're representing the views of management here in Cork to all the various offices that we have, which again is something that has changed a lot over the years. We have a lot more staff. The lines of communication must be a lot clearer and a lot more kind of transparent than they were previously. So I play a role in that. Probably one of the biggest roles I play in the last number of years is interacting with our new staff, the trainees we bring in, our academy structure, to make sure that they're getting a correct grounding in what we stand for as FDC, the independent nature of what we offer our clients, and making sure that they're kind of getting the same patterns of growth that we got, because it's a lot harder now with the scale we're at versus what when I came in the door we had 4 or 5 people. It was very easy to learn on the job. We have to be more precise in our plans now, and I enjoy that part of it as well, the trainee engagement.
You spoke there about a culture and how important it is in any organisation. In terms of the FDC Group way, what is that? Could you define that?
I could. I suppose really I've often thought about this because we documented our own kind of history of client feedback to us and our industry partners' feedback. And we classed that as, we actually called it the FDC way, and we designed a document around it to try and put down in writing what feedback we were getting from our industry partners, such as, FDC always send up the correct documentation. They don't have to come back to us and kind of reappraise what we've sent up. And clients always said, look, it's great to meet the same person year in, year out. If he tells me he'll ring me, or she tells me she'll ring me on a Tuesday, she does. So they like to see that part of it as well. The culture of FDC, I think, could be summed up in an Irish word, mehel. Mehel actually stands for like working together. And the cooperative culture, I think, of FDC that came from Jack Murphy, the originator of FDC from the start. I think that mehel word summarises that an awful lot. And I think it's a big part of FDC and the culture that we represent. And as I sometimes say to our own staff, it's all very well saying we have a culture. The culture is derived from the way you act, what you support, what you encourage, and what you foster. It can't just be written down and happen without the actions behind it.
Yeah, it's not just a strategy document. Yeah, it's lived and breathed it every day. And how did you end up working in FDC? I know you spoke about your professional qualifications there, but how did you actually end up in FDC Group?
I suppose from working in the bank, I got an appreciation, I suppose, for financial services originally. I would have always had a kind of an interest in personal finance. My mother comes from a place in Kerry, Valentia Island, and my grandfather was a fisherman. And we always, when we were brought up, we were told how, he educated himself financially. He bought shares in the banks, and, we were saying, Jesus, how did this fella even think of doing that at the time? But he had 7 children. They all got shares when he died in bank shares, which was unknown at the time. So I would always have had a personal financial interest in personal finance. My father worked with ethos, which is the Irish Cooperative Society, and they had interaction with FDC when FDC was setting up originally with the cooperative mentality. So I would have always liked that kind of thing. And moving from the bank, I felt the scale of FDC just fitted my own kind of ideals as to what I would like as regards interaction with clients on a face-to-face basis. And the opportunity arose in 1996 to join, and I was delighted to join.
Great. That's great story and great background into it. When you came in, is there one thing that surprised you about FDC that you weren't expecting?
I suppose coming from the bank, the scale obviously was a lot smaller, and back then a lot smaller than it is now. And I felt that you were rewarded for showing initiative. And I don't mean commercially, I mean in general terms, with respect to, if you were good at something, you were let loose to explore it further. And I think that initiative-driven thing was certainly rewarded. And the scale of the organisation and the flexibility to move within different parts of the organisation was super as well, because not only had you exposure to financial services, you were interacting with accountants, tax practitioners as well. So the big surprise for me was how the scale helped you develop a lot easier than in a bigger organisation like a bank.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. And training and development, would you focus a lot on that with your new grads in particular?
We do. And again, it would be remiss of me not to mention that we probably didn't have a proper training system for years. We let people off, if someone joined and, there was an office down the west, we shove them off down there and see how they got on and pat on the back, at the end of the year. We've refined that over the years now into an academy structure where we bring people in, they learn on the job, they're given exposure to various parts of the organisation, they sit in on meetings, they move from region to region. And as I mentioned earlier, part of my sales director role is bringing those people from raw recruits up to where you can land them in front of a client, and that they confidently represent our ideals really from a financial services perspective, But also we have to be aware of the commercials on it, in the achievement of their goals commercially as well.
Yeah. And Michael, how do you deal then with more experienced people coming in? What's the protocol?
As in more experienced clients?
And more experienced staff.
Yeah. More experienced staff, I sometimes reference it and saying, we would like to see people coming in where we can mould them a bit more towards the FDC way from the start. It's a slightly different dynamic with people coming in who have been what we would see as other institutions that mightn't be what we again would see as good as ourselves. It's a different dynamic. You don't obviously have the same training regime as someone coming in fresh into the organisation, but it definitely gives us a different aspect, and we can let people specialise in roles that they might have brought into the organisation a lot faster as well. A recent example was someone we took on who had experience in a kind of a corporate pensions environment that would have been more experience coming into us than we had, internally, and we were able to exploit that experience very fast. So it's a timing thing, really, being able to put people on the ground faster. But we look, as I said, it's a good mix, new and experienced, and but both very different.
Yeah, the intergenerational knowledge transfer is extremely important, isn't it, in a big organisation like
this? Certainly. Yeah. And when you mention intergenerational, we have intergenerational clients coming to us now. We have grandparents of our grandchildren of the grandparents who were original clients of ours. But your point about intergenerational experience at a staffing level is key as well. And as I say, for myself, the trainee interaction that I have as part of my sales director role is very rewarding for myself as well, to bring people to a stage where, they're, as I said earlier, they're able to sit in front of clients. But it's rewarding from my perspective because you're able to share your own experiences and bring them along as part of the FDC way of doing business.
Very good. In terms of advisory, what are the three most important aspects of it?
I suppose the obvious one is the advice you're giving is sound. And I think, sound, particular and specific to the client you're dealing with. It can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. And obviously the independent nature of FDC Financial Services lends itself to that good sound advice. But again, scale is important here. The bigger the scale, the more important it is that you're making sure the advice is sound. So that would be the first point, I would say. The second one, again, possibly and probably a very obvious one, compliance. Compliance from the perspective of what we know it to be, central bank compliance and all that is very important. And at Financial Services here, we have one person dedicated solely in their role to being the compliance officer, which was a decision we probably took ahead of the market, realising the importance of it and the dangers with not being compliant. And in conjunction with compliance, I would say the integrity of dealing with clients and respecting the client, that comes into that as well from an advisory perspective. The third one, I would say, with respect to advice and proffering advice to clients, is just ensuring, I suppose, that you're giving the advice in a manner that's dilutable or that's filtering the noise for the client. Because we have found that, clients come into us bamboozled with information they have received from maybe the larger institutions out there, such as banks or other brokers possibly. And we see our role as, maybe just distilling all that down to kind of simple. Clients do not come into it to be inundated with graphs and figures and performance stats. They really want someone to logically explain what, the details of their query.
Yeah, and simplify the complicated, absolutely. Yeah. And in terms of an organisation to work for, we've had COVID and we've had a hybrid working model promoted in many groups. How do FDC Group deal with this?
Very flexibly is the very easy answer for that. Again, I would think we were very much ahead of the market in the financial services side. I actually remember the day we had an internal meeting in the Metropole Hotel, and this was very early in February 2020, around the start of COVID, and we ordered a pile of new laptops. And I was saying, geez, are we doing the right thing here, And it proved to be kind of, very preemptive of what came down the line subsequently. But it got used. We actually had our most successful year commercially in 2021. And I think we all actually had our eyes opened with respect to the face-to-face versus online communication with clients, we would have had the traditional view that meeting clients in any other environment other than face-to-face wouldn't work, but it actually was the opposite. And again, you mentioned earlier intergenerational. The younger generation of clients are willing to accept advice from a professional without having to have a face-to-face relationship, which was a learning point for us. But I think FDC as a group fostered the whole online access to clients, but also if people needed to work from home for particular parts, which we all did, and some people have subsequently held on to a day or two a week, once you're doing your job and doing it in the correct fashion and within the parameters, obviously, of the FDC way, I think, FDC have been very accommodating in that regard.
Yeah, and that feeds in and you get that back from people, that kind of trusting culture.
Exactly, and that is exactly a very, very good point, because when you support people, it's going back to the hold your hand model, support people when they need support, they'll go the extra mile for you in the future. We've seen that with our own staff in financial services, where there are times of the year where you could be extremely busy, and without prompting, we have seen people in our various offices stay in late, come in on Saturdays if needs be, without, as I say, without being pushed to do it. And that all comes from maybe a year or two previously. They got a bit of leeway. It might have been a personal matter, or it could have been, back to working from home, or whatever the accommodation was at the time. It's not forgotten by staff.
Yeah, because life throws us challenges. And
certainly does.
You don't forget people from a professional capacity who look after you at the time, of course.
Exactly.
FDC is obviously a very strategic thinking group, and you've had several examples there of super foresight over the years. What do you see the big challenges coming down the road?
With respect to FDC, I think one of the challenges anyway is maintaining, I suppose, the local aspect of FDC within the parameters of the scaling up. And I think, I remember I had an interaction with a client a few years ago now, and they actually didn't realise, it was in our Kanturk office, they didn't realise there was any other FDC office, not a mind 40 odd other. So it just shows that people like the local, and I think it's something we can't lose sight of into the future. We must maintain that local aspect, people coming into town, meeting their accountant, their financial services person and the tax practitioner in the one visit. And I think that's a massive challenge for us based on the fact that we are scaling up either kind of organically, but also in our acquisition of practices, that we don't lose sight of that local. Another challenge that I see is expanding our shareholder base. People mightn't be aware, and again, going back to the cooperative mentality of FDC, it informs an awful lot of what we do, and we do have shareholders in FDC Co-op who receive a dividend each year. We probably haven't really scraped the surface of that, asking people to follow us on our journey, and I think there's massive scope for FDC to do that into the future, and bring the clients in as shareholders at a much greater scale than they are presently. So I think that's a big challenge. Possibly the last challenge I see is what I call filling the gap, the advice gap. There's a lot of bigger organisations in Ireland who meet with clients, but meet with clients that have a much greater wealth profile. And I think there's a gap in rural Ireland, especially for people who mightn't meet the criteria to be met by these big institutions and are subsequently being left behind. I think FDC has a massive role to play in becoming the advisor of choice at all levels and all our disciplines within the organisation to fill that gap.
Yeah, and the contribution to the rural economy is crucially important, and keeping the workforce there. And
that's what we came from. And we have small and medium enterprises and separate company and corporate kind of investing in pension schemes and all that. But our lifeblood really and still is an awful lot the agri community, rural Ireland, small provincial towns. That's where our offices are based, and they're our clients. And I'd like to take this opportunity also to mention that we are only here because of our clients and the loyalty of clients. We can talk about loyalty of staff all we want. It's the loyalty of clients and the intergenerational aspect of it, I think, which it stands to us and stands to the success of FDC.
Absolutely, that customer-centric approach will do you well into
Certainly.
the future. Yeah. So we've spoken about challenges. In terms of opportunities for the future for FDC, you spoke earlier on about doing a 5-year strategy plan.
Yeah,
Where do you see FDC in 5 years?
In 5 years' time, specifically FDC Group, I think will be bigger, albeit the scale of growth might be slightly diminished from what it has been in the last few years. With respect to financial services, I think I'd like to see us, maintain the advice level, the kind of the loyalty of our staff to the clients and vice versa within the expansion. So, as I mentioned at the very start, the industry out there from a financial services perspective has become very concentrated. But with that concentration comes challenges that you maintain your independence. And I think we're very strong as being, qualifying as an independent advisor and not being tied to any one particular industry group. And I think clients appreciate that. And I think in 5 years' time, we'd still like to be very independent. We'd still like to be part of, obviously, the FDC umbrella group of companies. But definitely, look, it's all down to commerce too. And I think if we can maintain our commercial advantage over competitors, but in the right way, and like part of our training as well, and this will be into the next 5 years, increasing our academy program. Like presently, we started it, we brought in 4 a few years ago. We're now bringing 10 into our current academy. Over the next 5 years, I'd like to see that explored further as well, and making sure that those academy graduates are brought in and grow under the same kind of terms and conditions that we all came in, but understanding fully like the way FDC does business. Commercial, but commercial in the right way.
Michael McCormack, Sales Director of Financial Services with FDC Group. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Delighted to be here.